Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2022 Ford Escape, we're going to be showing you how to install the Roadmaster base plate kit with removable arms. But before we do that, why don't we check it out and make sure that this is going to work for you. So before we get too carried away talking about the base plate itself, I figured it'd be useful just to kind of touch base and refresh ourselves on the main components that we're going to need to flat tow our Escape down the road in the first place. So you're going to need a total of 5 main parts. The first one is going to be the base plate, and that's there to provide us with a solid and reliable attachment point. That way we can hook our tow bar up to it. Tow bar is going to be the second component, and this is going to be the physical link that actually connects the front of our Escape to the back of our motorhome. The third main component will be safety cables, and these are there in the event of an unlikely disconnect. They're going to keep everything paired together. The fourth main component is going to be tow bar wiring, and what this is going to do is transfer the lighting functions from the back of your RV to the back of your Ford. And last but not least, the fifth main component will be a supplemental braking system, and what this is going to do is apply the brakes in your Escape whenever you hit the brakes in your coach, helping to bring you to a more predictable and complete stop. One other small thing that I do always like to recommend, especially on newer vehicles, is what's called a battery charge line kit for towed vehicles. And what that's going to do is essentially maintain your Escape's battery whenever you're flat towing it down the road. And I feel like that's really important. It's a small part, not really much to it, but it's going to keep that battery topped off. And especially on these vehicles, there's so many electronics, and some issues can arise if your battery goes flat or dead. So just some cheap insurance, to hopefully keep your trip going smooth and everything else. Something else I wanted to mention too, from my understanding with the 22 Ford Escape, it sounds like only the hybrid models are able to be flat towed. So definitely something to check into if you don't have a hybrid. Ours is a hybrid here today, so we're all good. If you don't have if your vehicle's not a hybrid, like I said, check into it. But there's always ways to be able to do it. You can put it on a trailer behind your motorhome or something along those lines. I just figured it was worth mentioning. So this is what the front of your Escape is going to look like whenever you're not hooked up to your motorhome and you're kind of just cruising around town and doing your thing. And I feel like the appearance is something that's important. Good looking car here, you don't really want to take away from it. But with that said, it can only get so good, really. I mean, you're adding a bunch of stuff here to the front, but I think it turned out really, really nice, actually. It does a pretty good job of blending in, especially the base plate openings here where you put your removable arms in. They kind of just come out right past. You do have to drill a hole here or create that opening, but it turned out really well. Safety chain hooks, or openings rather, come out just a little bit, so they're easy to get to, but they're not super noticeable. And with that said, the connector plug, these are obviously other components other than your base plate, but the connector plug and your breakaway switch, there's some available out there that are black in color, so you could always grab them if you wanted to, if that bothers you, and help it blend in even more. Or, I mean, honestly, I suppose you could paint them if that's your particular situation as well, just to help kind of have everything flow. Probably one of the other main things, other than how it's going to look and how your car is going to ride behind the old motorhome, is how easy it's going to be to hook up, right? You don't want something super complicated that takes up a bunch of time. And with the removable arms, it really makes things straightforward. So whenever you're ready to, set everything up, you're just going to take these arms, slide them in, rotate them about a quarter turn, and they're going to lock into place. Same thing with this one over here. And now what that's going to do is give us that attachment point we need to hook our tow bar up. So once you have them arms in, you can hook up your other stuff like your wiring and your braking system, breakaway switch, and so on. And then you can pair up the tow bar here. So these are quick type connects, so you just line it up, put your pin through, and then essentially lock it in there. So really straightforward. Safety cable will go right on there, and not really a whole lot to it. So this base plate is going to work with most Roadmaster tow bars. And it can also work with a lot of the other manufacturers as well. Let's say maybe you already have a tow bar, different brand that you really like, and you'd like to keep using it. Chances are really good you can find an adapter to put on the end of your existing tow bar to be able to allow it to pair up to your new Roadmaster base plate. So this is what your setup is going to look like, or can look like whenever you're towing it behind your motorhome. And I think it looks pretty good actually. Everything's spaced apart evenly, easy to see, easy to get to. You know, you can take a quick glance at it right away and pretty much tell if everything's right or not. So that's always a bonus. One thing that you need to pay attention to is the height from where your base plate arm comes out, the center of it, down to the ground. And I say that because that's going to determine if you need what's called a high-low adapter or not. So in our case, on level ground, if you go from the center there to the ground, it's about 14.5 inches. And that's important because what you can do is measure your motorhome, the center of the hitch pin hole, down to the ground. And if it's sitting up higher, way up high, like ours is today, you may need what's called the high-low adapter, which is this piece here. And you can see when you plug that into the hitch, it drops down and allows the tow bar to ride nice and level. And that's really going to affect, you know, a lot of different things, how your escape's gonna pull behind the motorhome and everything else. And so it's actually pretty important that you have it within that spec. And so as long as you're within 3 inches of each other, so if this measurement falls within 3 inches of your hitch pin hole measurement, you'll be in good shape. If you exceed that, definitely recommend getting a high-low adapter. And with the escape, this is somewhat low. Chances are pretty good. Most motorhomes are going to be higher than that. So a lot of times you'll need a drop. And we have plenty of options available for that right here at etrailer. Other than that though, pretty nice setup. You know, it's going to get the job done and allow you to go on some flat tow adventures. As far as the installation, really wasn't too bad. It definitely wasn't the easiest one that I've done, nor the hardest. Probably falls somewhere in the middle. More or less, it's just kind of time consuming, a little tedious at some points. You know, a little bit of trim in here and there behind the fascia just to get everything to clear the base plate. But if you follow along, hopefully, you know, we can help you out a little bit with that and clear some things up. Speaking of the installation though, if you're going to be putting this on, why don't we go ahead, pull into the garage and do that together now. To begin our installation, we're going to be here at the front of our escape, and we are going to have to remove the front cover. That way we can get the base plate on. So to start, pop up your hood, and along this front edge, we're going to have 4 10mm head bolts that we need to remove. Now if we move to our wheel well edge here, along the front side, we're going to have quite a few plastic pushpin style fasteners that run all the way along the side. We're going to have to pull those out. And I want to mention, from this point on, anything we do to one side of the vehicle, we're also going to do to the other side because it's set up the same way. But what you're going to do is take a flathead screwdriver or even a trim panel tool. Will work as well, and just pry out on the head. Then you're able to pull the whole fastener out. So we'll just do the same thing to get all of them removed. It does help if you turn your wheels in one way or the other. Kind of just gives you a little more working room here and makes these fasteners a little more manageable to get out. With that done, so we're going to have 2 bolts on the inside that are running up this way. That's connecting the front cover or front fascia to our quarter panel. So we need to get those out. So what you're going to do, if you take this trim piece here, and just kind of pull that out about to here. Once you have that off, we can come to this other side and move our felt liner to be able to get to those bolts. So if you just move your felt wheel well liner out of the way, this is what them bolts are going to look like. There's going to be 2 of them. The heads of the bolt are going to be facing towards the bottom of the vehicle, and they're going to be a 10 millimeter in size. So those are the ones we're going to need to remove. Just they're so tight in there. Just wanted to try to give you guys a clearer picture of what we were going to do here next. We'll try to get a tool in here. And get these out. I'm using something like this. You don't have to use, this tool, just a regular socket wrench with a 10 millimeter on it will work just fine, but I got this, so that's what I'm using. Just help speed things up a little bit. I get both these pulled out. So since we were right here, I figured might as well just kind of protect our paint, because when we pull everything off, you don't want to scratch anything, right? So I just used some painter's tape around the seams, then kind of pried our trim piece away. And I actually just used some of the packing material that come in the box with the base plate to kind of wedge it in there and just keep it away from our front fascia here. Over here, just on the passenger side of our vehicle, once you get to this point where you get those bolts out and everything else, we're gonna have a wiring connector we need to disconnect. It's gonna be this one here. And you can kind of just grab it and carefully pop it out. Makes it easier to work with. And to disconnect it, it looks like this gray lever. I'll have to get kind of pulled back like that. And then you should be able to pull it out. Just like that. On the bottom side of our fascia now, so if you split it in half, this side and this side, you're gonna have a total of 5 Torx bit screws you need to pull out, and I'm gonna use a T30 to do that. And if we move just a little bit further back along this edge, we're gonna have a total of 4 7 millimeter head screws. We'll just work our way down and get them removed. So now with the next set of hands, we can get our fascia removed. Now that's gonna be kind of tricky to see, but there's a pin or a tab along this edge, almost in the dead center. And we'll have a better look at it when we get the fascia off, but you're just gonna take a small flathead or something along those lines and just put a little bit of inward pressure in it. So you're just gonna kind of push it in some, and then you'll have to come in on the back side. So reach your hand back through there. And push it in as well on the other side. So just a little bit of pressure on the other side of the tab as well. And it's tight, so just take your time with it. But once it comes down, it comes down pretty quickly. So now we can start to work our way around. Here's kind of a better view of that tab. So my screwdriver, I was just gently pushing that in while I was applying slight pressure down. And that same setup is on this side. So that's why I had a screwdriver in there doing it from the inside as well. But from there, we can start to work our way around. And up top here, you may have to take a screwdriver and just kind of pry up on it, help it out some. So once we have the fascia free, we're gonna make sure we don't have any wires or anything that we need to disconnect, which we don't, so we can just set this out of the way for now. The bumper cover out of the way, we can remove this air dam thing here, and on each side it's gonna be held in place with a Pushpin fastener. Let's pry that out. And then all the way around it on the top and the bottom, we're going to have several tabs. And what you can do is just take a screwdriver and kind of pry up on them. Actually seems like they all pop out pretty easy. So same thing down here. And we can get this removed. Now we can focus on our ACC sensor, which is this component here. If your vehicle doesn't have this, obviously you're not going to need to worry about it, but ours does, so we'll address it. These two wire retainers, what we're going to do is pop those out. Like that. Then we're going to have 4 8mm head bolts. Pull these out. And then you should be able to pull this off. Flip it around and unplug it. So there's a tab, you can push down on it and pull it out. And then what you're going to do is take your wire and essentially run it to the back side here. And these keepers, you can push those in on this side of it. Plug this back in and then simply just reinstall it. And the reason it seems like we did that was to get some extra clearance here, I would assume. But with that, that done, we'll go ahead, reinstall these bolts and re-secure it. Now we can focus on the pad system, which is this piece here. Your vehicle may or may not have it, just depends on your model. Ours does, but we're gonna need to remove it for now. There's one 8mm head bolt. We'll pull that out. And we can disconnect it. So there's the connector there. Same deal, push down on the middle. We'll set this aside for now, but since we're right here too, it looks like we need to unclip the wire to make it a little bit longer potentially. Looks like there's kind of a clip that is keeping it on here. So I'll just take a screwdriver and pry that off. If you look right here on the driver's side, we're going to have our ECM, or the computer, and we need to just kind of loosen it up. So there's a 10mm nut. And we'll just kind of slide it back and just push it out of the way for now. At this point, if you look on each side of our air shutter dam, there's going to be some plastic tabs that are protruding out, and we need to cut these off essentially flush with this piece here. So I marked out where we need to cut. I'm going to use a cut off wheel or a Dremel tool to do this. Probably be the best bet. Maybe a small air saw or something like that would probably work as well. But with that said, we'll go ahead and carefully cut this off, making sure that it ends up being flush with this piece. When you get the main portion of that off, you know, if you have a little bit left over, not really a huge deal, you can always come back, file it down, use your disc, whatever, just to kind of smooth it completely flat and clean things up a little bit. Over here on the passenger side, the casting marks or the pieces were just set up a little bit different, but same idea. I just wanted to show you and give you a visual of where I cut and the material that I removed. What we can do now is remove a few bolts, and these are going to be our attachment points for our base plate sides. So we're going to have this nut up here, that's a 15mm. And then these two down here, which are 13 millimeters. So grab our sockets and pull these off. Then we can grab our base plate and start to put it on. So this is the side of the base plate, and these are side specific, so check your instructions, make sure you have the right one. I would assume they'd be kind of hard to mess up. They look like they only go in one way. So, but what's going to happen is this hole up here is going to line up with the stud, and these are going to line up with those. So we'll slide this in place, and then we can take that hardware we removed and put it back in place. All the bolts and nuts that we're going to use to secure the base plate, you want to take some red Loctite and put some on the threads. If you need some, you can always grab it right here at eTrailer. It's a little tight up here, but we'll manage. Get that started and tight. Take our other two bolts. I already put the Loctite on those. Get both of these going. And grab my tools here. What we're going to do is you want to pull, pull the base plate as far out to the outside as you can, so like that. And then we'll just snug these down. Then we need to make sure to come back with a torque wrench and tighten down all this hardware to the amount specified. And all the hardware actually that we put in, eventually we will come back and torque everything down, so just keep that in mind. If you don't have a torque wrench, you can always grab one here at eTrailer, or a lot of times go to your local auto parts store and they'll have one there available that you can rent. Now we can get the hardware in back here. I do want to note that these connector plugs are usually just snapped in right here. You don't have to move them out of the way. I just did so we can actually see what we're doing here. Show you guys. If you do want to move them, you can just take a trim tool and pop them off. But you can see there's a hole in the base plate and lines up with this hole there in the frame. You're going to take the shorter bolt and a split lock washer, put your Loctite on it, then take your handle nut, and you can bend this in a way to where that drops in behind there. And then the threads in it will line up with the hole there. So once you have that done, you can take your bolt and get this started. And once you have it hand tight, you can come back and tighten and torque it to the proper spec. If the handle breaks off, no big deal. We're going to break it off anyway. You might just have to kind of reach in there and hold it while you're tightening this down. So once that's torqued, I just pop these back on. Like I said, you don't have to take them off, but then we're just going to bend our computer mounting bracket back, reinstall the factory nut, and tighten it down. Now if we grab the air dam piece that we removed a little while ago, we can trim it out. That way our base plate will clear. Diagram and the instructions suggests that we cut out this area, obviously on each end of it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. With this trimmed out, we can simply just reinstall it the opposite way that we removed it. So we'll pop it back in and put in the Pushpin fasteners. These all do look the same, so you want to make sure to grab the ones that are a little bit smaller. That way they actually pop in there. So if your vehicle was equipped with this sensor like ours was, you are going to have to slightly modify it just a little bit right there, there's going to be a gusset, a little piece of plastic, and we're going to have to trim that out. So take our cutting tool here and just remove that material. What I'll probably do, since it's such a small area, is kind of come back here with a hand file or some sandpaper and just try to get that as flush as I can. So with that piece trimmed out, we can get this reinstalled. So it's actually going to bolt up something like this. It's pretty tight in there, but I suggest taking the connector, putting that back in first. Then we can take this bolt. Maybe they call it a Whiz nut or Whiz bolt. I'm going to put this flat washer on it. And I'll try to position this here in a way that it'll actually bolt up because it's really tight, not a ton of space, but that's okay. We'll get it through, and then on the back side, I'm going to put the nut and another washer as well. Then once I have this hand tight, I'll come back with a socket and snug it down. When you go to snug this down, you can use either an 11mm or a 7/16. We'll hold the nut and snug it down. Now we can take our crossbar, and the holes in the side are going to line up with these holes, and you're going to put this in place. A little bit easier to do if you got a friend around, but you're going to take one of these bolts and put on your Loctite and a flat washer. Put those in. I'm going to get the other side going too, and hopefully this will kind of hold itself up. Make this a little more manageable here. And once that's kind of resting in place, then we can go on the inside, and you're going to place a split lock washer and a hex nut onto the bolt. Get it hand tight. I'm going to use that same hardware combination for our remaining holes. So what I'm going to do now, since you can rotate this base plate kinda, I want to make sure that it's level, so I just ran a level across the front here. And while I'm holding it in place, I'll see if I can't manage to do this by myself. Get it where I want, and then I'm just going to tighten down one of the bolts, hopefully to where it keeps it in position. So it's good enough and about right where I want it. With all these snug now, we'll come back and make sure they're properly torqued. At this point, it'd be a great time to install any of your other flat twin components like wiring or a braking system. And I say that because the fascia, if you have all this extra room to work, it just makes life a lot easier. So that's what I'm gonna do. If you're not gonna be putting those on or you already have them installed, what you would do is follow the instructions. You're gonna have to kind of trim some parts of your fascia to get everything to fit, and then you'd simply reinstall it the opposite way. But with that said, I'm gonna get all our other parts on and then come back and we can trim the fascia out and do all that together once I have our other components installed. Whenever we're ready to get our front fascia back on, we are gonna have to do a couple things, some trimming and move a couple of wires around and things like that. So first off, we're gonna be over here. This would be the passenger side. If you look, we have an ambient air temperature sensor and some wiring right here in this area. And we need to kind of move it out of the way. That way when we drill openings, we're not going to hit it or anything. So your sensor, you could just take a trim tool, flathead screwdriver, whatever you got. Pry that out of the way. Pop that off as well. And we're just simply going to kind of secure this up here in this area. And I think what I'm gonna do too is just kind of zip tie this wire up as well, just to give us some extra clearance when we go to drill. We don't, preferably don't want to drill into any wires here, because it cause a bunch of other issues. So we'll get this rained down, and this will keep everything out of the way. And repositioning the sensor isn't going to hurt anything. All this does is measure the outside air temperature, so it's still going to be able to get a reading and work the way it should. What we can do now, this bottom flap here, we're going to remove that because we're going to have to trim some of it, and I don't want to risk trimming through and hitting the bottom side of our fascia. So on the sides, you're going to have 3 fasteners coming in from the bottom, and then we're going to have some here in the middle. So I'm going to use a 7mm socket to pull those out. Then here's the 3, but obviously the heads are on the back side, but same deal. Once we get these out, this bottom piece should come off and make it a little easier to work with, just like this here. So this piece here, we do need to remove a little bit of material off each end. So this piece is this side is a driver side, and again, diagram and the instructions, I just kind of mark that out. And I'll go ahead and grab my cutting tool here and get that material removed. On the passenger side of it, it's going to be set up a little bit different, but same idea. Just cut this area out. So now back to our fascia, the outermost attachment points where that piece that we just trimmed, that would get bolted up to here. Since we cut those spots out, essentially we need to make these flush as well. So careful when you're doing this, you don't want to get carried away and burn through the bottom of your fascia or anything, so be very deliberate while you're trimming this out. I'm just going to kind of cut around it and get it as flush as possible. So I like to start by cutting this piece off. It just makes it a little easier to kind of get my tool worked in there. So I went ahead and that piece that we took off and trimmed, I bolted that back up opposite way that we removed it. And now what we can do is flip this over and drill out the holes that our base plate is going to protrude through. So what we're going to be doing is trimming out a circle opening here in this area. Obviously we're going to do it on each side of the fascia, but they give you some measurements that you can take, and I put my mark there. The last one of these I did, it fit a little bit tight over on this side, so I think I might just bump it over just a hair and see if that works better. So I'll go ahead and get everything lined up, and I'm using a hole saw to do this. Gives us a good clean cut. And then we should be in pretty good shape. We'll be able to test fit our fascia. Now at the next set of hands, we can get the fascia on. Don't forget to plug in any electrical connectors that you may have disconnected. And just take it slow while you're doing this, make sure everything fits into place like it should. And if you have to, if something don't line up, if we have to, we'll always come back and remove a little more material. So right away, it looks like we'll probably have to trim this area here where our wiring connector is. So I'll go ahead and grab some snips and do that now. I'm thinking I might be able just to cut that and then kind of push this over it maybe. Not really fitting all that well, so we'll probably just end up needing to cut some of this out. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Roadmaster base plate kit with removable arms on our 2022 Ford Escape.